Most people walk past a so-called weed and see a problem to spray. What they're actually walking past is a bioaccumulator, a plant that pulls minerals and compounds out of the soil and concentrates them in its tissue. Some of the plants in this video do that better than anything you'll find on a pharmacy shelf, and they're doing it for free right now without anyone's permission. We're going to go through 10 of them today, and by the end, you won't look at a weedy patch of ground the same way again. Number 1, dandelion. Someone is out in their yard right now, spraying dandelions with herbicide, and then driving to the pharmacy to pick up a $60 liver detox supplement. That's not a knock on anyone. That's just what happens when a plant gets rebranded as a pest for long enough that people stop looking at it clearly. Taraxacum officinale is one of the most nutrient-dense plants in the temperate world. The leaves carry iron, riboflavin, and vitamin E at levels that rival cultivated greens. And that bitter taste you notice in a spring leaf isn't a problem to cook around. It's the plant signaling compounds that stimulate bile flow and support liver function. The root feeds your gut microbiome as a prebiotic and carries documented antioxidant activity. Clinical evidence confirms the leaf also acts as a genuine diuretic, strong enough to amplify pharmaceutical diuretics if you're already taking them. Number 2, plantain leaf. Think about a kid getting stung by a bee on a camping trip. No first aid kit anywhere, and someone's grandfather just calmly pulls a broad leaf off the ground, chews it, and presses it to the sting. That's not folklore. That's applied plant chemistry doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Plantago major and Plantago lanceolata grow in almost every beaten-down, compacted, disturbed soil environment you can find. Driveways, footpaths, packed lawns, and most people step right over them daily. The leaves contain aucubin, a compound with documented anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial action, plus mucilage that physically draws irritants out of tissue. Internally, that same mucilaginous quality coats and calms irritated mucous membranes. So plantain leaf tea has a long record of use for respiratory irritation and gut inflammation too. For identification, look for parallel veins running the full length of each leaf and the ribbed seed stalks rising above the rosette in summer. Number 3, yarrow. Archaeologists found yarrow in Neanderthal burial sites, which means this plant was in use before we figured out agriculture. Medieval soldiers packed it directly into wounds to slow bleeding, and that wasn't superstition. That was field medicine based on direct observation across generations. The genus name Achillea comes from the myth that Achilles treated his soldiers' wounds with it, and while that's a legend, the chemistry isn't. The flowers and leaves contain flavonoids and sesquiterpene lactones with real anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial action. Applied to a cut, yarrow works as a styptic, speeding clot formation. Taken as a tea internally, it acts as a diaphoretic, meaning it helps the body manage fever by promoting sweating. Identify it by the finely divided, feathery leaves that earned it the name millefolium, meaning 1,000 leaves, and crush one between your fingers. That sharp medicinal smell won't leave any doubt. Number 4, stinging nettle. The sting is what stops most people cold, and that's a real loss, because Urtica dioica carries iron, calcium, magnesium, vitamins A, C, and K at levels that make most commercial green powders look watered down. The sting itself comes from silica needles that inject histamine and formic acid on contact, and some people have actually used that mechanism on purpose, pressing nettle leaves against arthritic joints to drive blood flow and reduce chronic inflammation. That practice has a name: urtication. Cook or dry the leaves and the sting neutralizes completely. The seeds support adrenal and kidney function, and the rhizomes have a documented history of use for benign prostatic hyperplasia. What makes nettle a systemic tonic is that it's doing several jobs at once. If you're on diuretic medications, talk to a practitioner first, because nettle's diuretic action is strong enough to matter. Number 5, chickweed. While most foragers are waiting for the ground to thaw, Stellaria media is already out there, germinating in cold soil and forming dense mats across garden beds and disturbed ground from late autumn through early spring. It looks like nothing, a small, sprawling plant with tiny white star-shaped flowers, and gardeners have been pulling it out for generations because of that. That's a mistake. Chickweed is high in saponins, which give it a mild soapy quality that makes it effective in salves for eczema and itchy skin conditions. And internally, it soothes irritated mucous membranes and supports the body's natural clearing processes. The leaves are also edible raw, with a mild, fresh flavor that works well in salads or pesto. Cut it with scissors rather than pulling it, and it regrows quickly from the base, giving you multiple harvests through the cold months. If you're prone to kidney stones, balance your intake with calcium-rich foods. To confirm you've got Stellaria media and not mousy or chickweed or a Veronica species, look for the single line of fine hairs running along one side of the stem. Number 6, red clover. Farmers have known for centuries that Trifolium pratense rebuilds depleted soil through nitrogen fixation. What gets discussed far less is that the same plant is also producing isoflavones, compounds that bind directly to estrogen receptor sites in the body. Isoflavones are phytoestrogens, so they bind to those receptor sites with a much weaker effect than your body's own estrogen. That weak binding is actually what makes red clover useful for managing hormonal fluctuation during perimenopause, without the risks tied to pharmaceutical hormone replacement. The flowers are the primary medicinal part, dried for tea or tincture, and they also work raw in salads or infused into honey. Beyond the hormonal action, red clover supports lymphatic drainage and liver clearance, which is why traditional herbalists reached for it when lymph nodes swelled or respiratory congestion settled in. If you're on blood thinners or managing a hormone-sensitive condition, talk to a practitioner first. Identify it by the pale chevron marking on each of the 3 leaflets. Number 7, mullein. Verbascum thapsus doesn't grow where conditions are easy. It colonizes roadsides, gravel lots, and compacted ground that most plants won't touch, spending its first year as a flat rosette of thick, felt-covered leaves before sending up a flower spike that can hit 6 feet in year 2. Native Americans called it big tobacco and smoked the dried leaves for respiratory conditions, which sounds counterintuitive until you look at the mechanism. The leaves contain saponins and mucilage, and smoking them delivered those compounds directly to the bronchial tissue that needed them. Most herbalists today use mullein as a tea or tincture instead. The leaf tea works for bronchitis, dry coughs, and congestion. The flowers infused in olive oil are a traditional ear infection remedy. The saponins irritate mucous membranes just enough to trigger productive coughing, while the mucilage soothes the tissue at the same time. Always strain mullein tea through a fine cloth or coffee filter because the tiny leaf hairs will irritate your throat if they get into the cup. Number 8, cleavers. If you've walked through a hedgerow and come out covered in tiny sticky burrs, you've already met Galium aparine. Most foraging guides skip right past it because it's got no showy flowers and no obvious edible parts, just a sprawling, sticky annual that climbs through other plants. But herbalists across Europe and North America consistently reached for it as their primary lymphatic herb, specifically for swollen glands, skin conditions tied to fluid stagnation, and urinary tract support. The whole above-ground plant is the medicine, and it works best fresh. Press it into cold water and steep it overnight, because heat degrades the active compounds. Dried cleavers loses most of its potency, which is why commercial preparations rarely deliver what the fresh plant does. Harvest it in spring before it sets seed. The sticky whorled leaves and square stem make identification straightforward, and there are no dangerous lookalikes in its temperate habitat. Number 9, wild violet. Every spring, viola species push up through lawn edges and garden beds, and most people mow them straight down without a second thought. That's a real loss, because the leaves carry vitamins A and C and produce mucilage, a slippery gel-like compound that binds to bile acids in the digestive tract and supports both cholesterol management and gut health. Internally, violet works as a lymphatic and anti-inflammatory herb, and traditional herbalists used it specifically for dry, irritated respiratory conditions because that mucilage coats and calms inflamed tissue. The flowers are edible, but the leaves carry the medicinal weight. One hard contraindication: people with G6PD deficiency, a genetic enzyme condition affecting red blood cell stability, should not use violet internally because some of its compounds can trigger hemolytic reactions. That's a real clinical concern. Stick to leaves and flowers, never the roots, which are emetic in most viola species. Number 10, self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. Prunella vulgaris got called self-heal, heal-all, and wound-wort because people watched it work for centuries across European, Asian, and Native American traditions independently, none of them comparing notes. Modern research zeroed in on a specific compound, rosmarinic acid, a polyphenol that shows up in rosemary and other mint family plants. But Prunella produces it in concentrations that have drawn serious scientific attention for antiviral applications, including work on herpes simplex. It inhibits inflammatory enzymes, disrupts viral replication, and scavenges free radicals all at once, which isn't how a pharmaceutical drug works. That's a plant running multiple defense systems simultaneously. Topically, it's been used as a poultice and salve for cuts and skin inflammation for centuries. Internally, it works as a tea for sore throats and mouth sores. The whole above-ground plant is medicinal, and it's growing right now in the lawn you walked across this morning.